bitter autumn wind swept across the Kansas plains.
Стойте! Это прекратится сейчас!
Stood at the outskirts of town.
Я здесь.
His rough and
Они в
calloused
безопасности.
hands balled into tight fists at his
Easy
sides.
now. I'm
Over the
here to
course
help.
of his years out west,
Who are you?
the former cavalry officer
A
had
friend.
witnessed more
You
than
look
his fair
tired.
share of
Rest
injustice.
here.
But nothing in all his experience could have braced him for what unfolded before his eyes on that frigid October morning. 4 young girls, the oldest no more than 14 and the youngest just 6, stood trembling on an auction platform in threadbare dresses, while their uncle, a hard-faced man by the name of Vernon Pike, hollered out their value to anyone willing to listen. Thomas had ridden into town that day for nothing more than a few supplies. He had not come looking for trouble, and he certainly had not come prepared for anything like this. But the instant his gaze locked with that of the eldest girl, Sarah, something deep inside him shattered, then reset itself, hard and unyielding as forged steel. Her eyes were dry, carrying no tears whatsoever. What they held instead was a fierce and quiet determination, the kind that comes from someone who has made up their mind to shield the people they love no matter the cost. The younger 3, Emma, Lucy, and little Grace, stood close behind her. Vernon Pike had come into guardianship of the girls 6 months prior, after their parents perished in a house fire. Rather than honoring his brother's memory and raising those children with dignity, he saw only the burden of 4 extra mouths and the opportunity to turn a profit. He was selling them off as indentured servants, a practice that, while sitting on shaky legal ground, was still very much alive in the remote territories, where the long arm of the law rarely reached. Thomas had spent the better part of 15 years pouring himself into his ranch after leaving military life behind, working from the first light of dawn until the last glow of dusk to build something worth having out of that unforgiving land. Years earlier, he had lost his own family to cholera, and the ranch had come to serve as both his refuge and his cage, every corner of it haunted by the ghost of a life that never was. Now, standing there watching those innocent children being traded off like cattle at market, every protective instinct he had long since buried came surging back with a force he could not contain. When Pike opened up the bidding, Thomas's voice cut clean through the murmuring of the crowd, sharp and deliberate as a rifle crack. He outbid every last man there, paying a sum so steep it amounted to nearly everything he had managed to save, money he had been carefully setting aside to grow his cattle operation. The townsfolk whispered among themselves and cast their judgments, most of them assuming the worst about what a man alone would want with 4 young girls. Thomas paid their gossip no mind whatsoever. His only concern was getting those children as far away from their uncle, and from anyone else who might seek to use them, as he possibly could. As he walked the sisters to his wagon, Vernon Pike stood behind them, counting his money with a self-satisfied smirk, never once bothering to glance back at the nieces he had just sold off like surplus livestock. The journey back to the ranch passed in near total silence, broken only by the soft, broken sobbing of little Grace. Thomas wanted badly to offer some words of comfort, but nothing he could think to say felt equal to the weight of what those girls had been through. So instead of speaking, he made a decision, quiet and firm, one that would alter the course of all their lives in ways none of them could yet imagine. That very first evening, he gathered the 4 sisters together in his modest ranch house and made them a promise, the kind that seemed to settle into the walls of the room and stay there. He told them plainly that they were not servants in his home, they were not property, and they owed him absolutely nothing. He would give them a roof over their heads, food on the table, and safety, and he would ask nothing in return beyond letting him help them work towards something better. Sarah, who had learned through hard experience not to trust easily, looked straight at him and asked what he was really after. Thomas met the gaze of each girl before he answered, and when he did, he was completely honest with them. He told her he wanted to give them back what had been taken from him long ago, a family and a sense of purpose. He wanted to show, in whatever way he still could, that even in a world as brutal and unsparing as the frontier, genuine kindness was still capable of taking root and growing into something real. The girls did not trust him right away. After everything they had lived through, it would have been strange if they had. But they were exhausted and frightened, and they had nowhere else in the world to go. That night, For the first time in what felt like an eternity, they slept in proper beds with full bellies. Sarah, however, lay awake long after the others had drifted off, her eyes fixed on the door, waiting for the moment the whole thing revealed itself as a trap. That first year turned out to be far more difficult than Thomas had bargained for. The challenge was not the added expense, nor the extra labor. It was the walls those girls had constructed around themselves, thick and high and built to last. Sarah, in particular, kept him at arm's length, doing her share of the chores without complaint, but never once lowering her guard, always quietly ready to gather her sisters and disappear into the night if things took a bad turn. Thomas, for his part, was patient in the way that only a man who has spent years working with wild horses and stubborn land can be patient. He did not try to force their trust. He simply showed them, day after day through consistent and quiet action, that his word carried weight, and that the safety he had offered them was not a temporary illusion waiting to dissolve. Little by little, the ranch began to change. It shed the sparse, solitary atmosphere of a bachelor's homestead and became something altogether different, something warmer and more alive. Thomas did not simply house and feed the girls. He set about educating them. Each morning before the day's work began, he sat them down and taught them reading, writing, and arithmetic, drawing on whatever books he could get his hands on from traveling merchants passing through. He taught them animal husbandry, land management, and the fundamentals of running a business, knowledge that most girls of that era were simply never given the chance to acquire. When neighbors came around and made a point of criticizing him for, as they saw it, wasting a proper education on females, Thomas looked them in the eye and told them plainly that intelligence did not belong to one gender, and that these 4 girls would one day outperform most of the men he had ever had the displeasure of knowing. By the second year, something genuinely remarkable had begun to take shape. The girls were not merely surviving. They were flourishing, and more than that, they were creating. Sarah, now 16 years old, revealed a remarkable natural talent for working with horses and began developing training methods that proved surprisingly effective. Emma found her calling in veterinary medicine, seeking out the local doctor at every opportunity, riding along on farm visits and soaking up everything she could learn. Lucy grew captivated by agriculture and began experimenting with crop rotation techniques she had come across in Thomas's old farming journals. And little Grace, now 8 years old, had appointed herself the official keeper of the ranch's records, maintaining ledgers so precise and thorough that a seasoned accountant would have had nothing to criticize. Working together, the Hawthorne Ranch, as everyone in the region had come to call it, began putting into practice methods that turned more than a few heads. The sisters established what was likely the first horse training program in the entire region, built on the principle of gentleness rather than dominance, never breaking the animal's spirits to bend them to human will. That philosophy had not come from a book. It had come directly from their own intimate understanding of what cruelty does to a living creature. They also built cooperative agreements with neighboring farms run by widows and other women working on their own, weaving together an informal network of mutual support that pushed back, quietly but firmly, against the male-dominated ranching establishment that surrounded them. Their growing success drew attention from all directions, not all of it welcome. By 1895, the Hawthorne Ranch had become the most profitable operation across 3 counties, and Sarah Hawthorne had earned a reputation that stretched far beyond the region. She was widely regarded as the finest horse trainer west of the Mississippi. But prosperity never caused the sisters to forget where they had come from or what they had endured to get there. Drawing on the wealth they had built, they founded the first dedicated sanctuary for orphaned and abandoned children in the state of Kansas, a place where young people could learn a trade, receive a real education, and above all, be treated with the dignity and respect that every child is owed from the moment they draw breath. They named it Haven House, and it grew into a model that other states would look to and eventually replicate. Thomas watched his adopted daughters become something elemental, fierce, and tireless advocates for the vulnerable, living proof that when people are genuinely cared for and given a real opportunity, there is no ceiling to how far they can rise. When he passed away in 1902, surrounded by his girls and the many dozens of children whose lives they had touched over the years, his final words were few, but they carried everything. He told them that he had come into all of this believing he was the one doing the saving. But the truth, as it turned out, was exactly the opposite. It was they who had saved him, who had given his remaining years a meaning that reached far beyond his own survival. The sisters carried on the work for decades after he was gone. Haven House grew and expanded into a network of facilities stretching across the West. None of them ever married. They gave their lives instead to building the world they had so desperately needed when they were small and frightened and had no one to turn to. Historians would eventually recognize the Hawthorne sisters as true pioneers in the fields of child welfare and women's rights. But the people who actually knew them understood what they really were. They were living evidence that one person's willingness to do the right thing, even when it costs something, can send ripples forward through time and touch generations that person will never live to see.